Hey everybody, welcome back for part 2 of rectangular construction, fitting patterns. Today we are looking at the measurements we took in part 1, and we're going to take them and turn them into actual pattern shapes. And then we're going to look at those shapes and see where those shapes have problems fitting our bodies and what we can do about it. So we have our measurements, but that's not actually the same size as you want to use for our pattern pieces, because when you're sewing, you always have a seam allowance. This is the distance from the edge of your fabric to your line of stitches. If you are working with something like linen that frays, you're going to need a little longer seam allowance so you can wrap that edge under and finish it. For my particular project, I'm actually going to be using a wool that's fulled, so it's not going to fray apart. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance so that I can lay that edge down flat and tack it down. Now you add that seam allowance to each edge that pattern piece is going to be sewn on. So for our shoulder to shoulder measurement, that's the width of our body panel. So there's a seam on the left and a seam on the right. So we're going to add a total of 1 inch, 1/2 inch for each side. Shoulder to sleeve end, there's a seam here at the shoulder, and then there's a cuff. For my arm scythe, that's the top of the sleeve that goes over my shoulder, there's a seam in the back and a seam in the front, plus 1 inch. Arm scythe to waist, there's a seam here at the top and a seam at the bottom. And wrist measurement, there's a seam on each side of it that comes together. And top of my shoulder to the bottom of my hem, 1 inch. The seam here at the shoulder and then hemming on my bottom. So we're going to add those measurements together to get what distance these pieces actually need to be. So my shoulder to shoulder body width is now 11.5 inches. My shoulder to sleeve end is 26. My arm scythe is 19.5. My bottom arm scythe is 7, the length, and my wrist is 10. My total length is 61. And that is just adding those measurements. So these measurements is what your pattern pieces are actually going to be. So taking these, my shoulder to shoulder width is the width of my body panel. It's going across here, and that's going to be 11.5 inches wide. My shoulder to sleeve end all the way down here is going to be 26 inches. My arm scythe, that's the sleeve that's going over the shoulder front to back, is 19.5 inches. My arm scythe to waist is 7 inches. My wrist is 10 inches. And then my total body panel length, how long I want this whole dress to be, 61 inches. Now we get to the math. To figure out A, B, and C, you've got to plan a little bit. A is going to be the side of your body. This is the distance under your arm that's between the side of your sleeve and the other side of your sleeve. So this is literally the physical side of your body and figuring out how long this measurement needs to be. So to do it, we start with your full bust measurement, 41 inches for me. Now, we are not working with stretchy fabric, so you have to add some ease to that. That's movement that allows you to breathe, to bend, to reach over, grab a, pick a cup, things like that. So we're going to add 4 inches of ease, 45 inches, right? Now, part of that 45 inches is covered with the front and back body panels, so we have to subtract them out. Tricky part, you have to use the finished measurement for this. We're not working with seam allowances yet, so we don't want to count them. So you don't want to use the 11.5, you want to use your 10.5. This is after that seam is taken away, what's going to be left. So for me, that's minus 10.5 times 2, which is 21 inches. 45 minus 21, 24 inches. So that means on my body, it's about even. we generally assume this, there's 12 inches on each side of my body under my arms that I need to cover with fabric. There's 4 of these gores. There's one in the front, one in the back on each side. So we're going to take that 24 inches and divide it by 4, which equals 6 inches. That's the finished measurement of A. Again, we're going to sew right here and right here. So we add an inch, meaning that my A, when I cut, is 7 inches. Right? Now, B is the waist measurement. This one is you need if you're doing this extra piece right here, and this is what keeps it closer to a body in a way that feels flattering on my body type. So my waist measurement is 35 inches. Again, we're going to add the 4 inches of V's because I like to breathe and eat and things like that. Brings us up to 39 inches. Same thing, we're going to take away the finished body panel. So 10.5 times 2, which is 21. 39 minus 21 is 18 inches at my waist. Again, there's 4 of these panels. 18 divided by 4 is 4.5 inches. And the only reason I can do that in my head is I have done this lots. So feel free to bust out the calculator. I do all the time. 4.5 inches plus our seam allowance again equals a finished a pattern finish of 5.5 inches. So 2 things happen with this measurement. If you notice, the sleeve does not start at an angle, right? You don't want the sleeve to meet at the body part. It needs to actually have this straight edge so that it can meet A neatly. So the end of the sleeve is going to have a 7-inch straight edge as well, so that these meet neatly. Sorry, my drawing is not, but in order for those to meet straight. The same thing is going to happen with your bottom gore. Instead of going all the way to a point, it's going to come to this flat edge so that it can smoothly meet the top gore. And that means the top of it is 5.5 inches. To figure out the length of the gore, we need to subtract out our total body length plus what we've already used up with our sleeves and our top of gore. So body panel, again, we're going back to using the finished measurements first because we're going to add the seam allowances. So 60 inches minus half of the arm size because we're only looking at one side of the body. So we want to just look at what half that sleeve would be. Again, here we're going back to our finished measurements. So half of 18.5 is about 9 3/4. Minus the finished length of the top gore. Our finished length is 6. Now we're using that full measurement because this is one whole piece here. So 60 minus 15 3/4 is 40. Somebody's going to laugh at my math here. This is how it's going to go down. 20, let's see. It's about 44 1/4. That math might not be right. I'm going to be checking that with a calculator. If it's not, y'all can please enjoy the giggles of this video. So 44 1/4 vertical distance on this pattern piece. So now we have width and length of every piece except for this bottom gore. I have heard half a dozen different explanations about how wide this should or shouldn't be. For me personally, in a full-length dress that I want to be able to walk easily in, I do not take little mincing steps, I tend to use about 1.5 of my body width panels. So with mine being 11, I'm probably going to use about a 15-inch here. If you are making a shorter tunic, you don't need as much. My husband's tunics, because he has both a broader chest and his tunics are much shorter, I actually only use about half the body panel length on him. Somewhere between those measurements is going to be your happy spot. It's going to be how full you want your dress, or tunic, how big of steps you take, what you're comfortable with. So these measurements are designed to make one of two types of tunics. Simple rectangular with 2 body panels, 4 bottom gores, 2 sleeves. Or 2 body panels, 2 sleeves, 4 top gores, and 4 bottom gores. And then when you assemble them, you end up with something that looks like one of these 2 patterns. Very simple, very straight. None of us are blocks. And this is where we're going to talk about how to change those rectangles so that they're actually a little bit more flattering. So I printed this, but it's kind of hard to see on the black and white. So we're going to flip up here and look at the computer. So this particular body form is generated using my measurements, and it lets me see where the problems are at. So when I take this same tunic, these are the exact same pattern pieces up here, and they're just kind of folded around the body, which is what we're doing. You can see that right here, there is this point that sits up off my shoulder because my shoulder is not a right angle. It actually drops down a good bit. So this is one area that creates some funky sitting seams. Another, there is a lot of overlap going on right in here. My biceps are not near as wide as my fabric, and so it's creating a whole lot of bulk right here and hiding my waistline. The other, and this is a little harder to see on the computer, is that if you took a ruler and you measured this angled line right here, it's actually longer than this straight vertical. And when you put this fabric on your body, if you don't account for that difference, what you end up with is this frowny shaped seam at the bottom where the outer edges are draping down. Looking at a masculine shape, you have some of the same issues. You may not have as much of a shoulder point, but again, most of us are not actually Minecraft figures. Similar bicep, there's a whole lot of extra fabric, maybe not quite as much, but it is still there. And same frowny face droop to look for. So things we can do. Rectangular construction is not always square. And in fact, much, much earlier than what most people think, we started cutting curves and things because human bodies have been human bodies for a long time. So you can look pre-Viking era and find curved arm scythes. You can find as ancient as Minoan times, you can see what looks to be cut angles in fabric and cut curves in fabric. That's 1300 BCE. And we did have times things were blocky, but that wasn't always the case. Also, depending upon where you are playing in your medieval hobby and how accurate people require you be. Definitely take that in mind. But these are things that you can tweak to make this fit in a way that our modern aesthetic tends to find more flattering. So one of the big things I do on mine is this excess fabric right here under my arms. There is a ton of that. I don't need that. So I will curve this measurement up and out. Now the caution here is don't go too far. It is entirely possible to take out too much and then you have to add in a gore, which is not scary. I just did it. If you look at my dress, I just accidentally cut my sleeves too narrow. You can do this after a dress or a tunic is assembled. You can go through, put it on inside out and pin this distance right here to find out how much you want to take out. You can also measure to double check before you even start cutting. You can measure your biceps, flex, make a big muscle, add a little bit of ease and your seam allowance and make sure that you're staying close to that. But this will take care of a lot of that extra fabric that we were seeing in the body panel. For the sleeves, for the top of that shoulder, you have 2 choices. You can add a slightly curved seam right here at the top of the shoulder, and that will take out this point right here. Or you can cut the shoulder out this way and trim it down a little bit of an angle, and that will also get rid of that point. So either one of those things are going to take care of that point that's sticking out at the shoulder. When we cut out our fabric, we're actually going to measure this distance and make sure that these 2 lines are the same so that our finished gore length is the same thing across. Same thing here. You might take out less for someone with bigger biceps or muscles. You might need to take out a little bit more for someone with a steeper shoulder slope. If you have a fuller belly, if you are trying to make a tune maybe for someone who's pregnant or someone who likes their food a whole lot and they have a fuller waist, totally works. You can still use this same construction. You don't have to take the seam way out here to do it. If you add a narrower bit of extra at the top of the gore and a fuller bottom gore, what ends up happening is this flare widens out really quickly and will allow more room for belly or midsection here. Again, this doesn't look like a whole lot right here on this side. Let me make sure you guys can see this. I'm sorry. It doesn't necessarily look like a lot right here, but this is one of 4 panels. And so when you think about how much fabric you're actually adding, a simple 1-inch increase up here can add up to 10 or 12 inches of fabric around the waist as well, giving you some more space. So that is a couple different options for both adding and taking away fabric. Double checking your measurements, seeing where they need to be. When we make the next video, we're actually going to do a cutting layout, and we're going to look at how to position these pieces on fabric together, and then we're going to cut out our fabric. Yay! So until next time, please feel free to ask me if you have questions, if there's something you want me to cover, if there is a body specific question, please feel free to ask. I'm happy to do the best I can. Thank you.